How can a good God exist with all of this evil in the world? Now, this is also referred to as the problem of evil. It is one of the most powerful attacks against the Christian religion that has been leveled down through, philosophical history, okay? And so I want to walk through it tonight. I want to give a brief overview of it. You can easily spend hours and hours and hours debating this topic. But what I want to do tonight is just give you guys a brief idea of what the argument is, and then I want to give you kind of two answers to it to try and resolve it, okay? Here's the first thing I want to say. The problem of evil is a logical problem, okay? This is a logical issue that we need to resolve logistically, okay? I've actually got what is called essentially a syllogism here. This syllogism essentially outlines what the problem of evil is. These are the three primary premises, okay? So I'm going to deal with it in a logical way. Now, a lot of people, I think, object to God, say the problem of evil, but they're objecting on an emotional level, if that makes sense. So they say things like, how can a good God exist with all of the evil in the world? But it's an emotional response they're having. So I want you to know that not everybody you're talking to who brings this argument up is thinking through it rationally and logically. I'm going to answer it rationally and logically tonight, but know that with some people, when they bring this up, they are presenting an emotion to you. They're saying, I struggle with this. Help me with this. This is something that bothers me about God, right? And you need to recognize that. There's a very important skill in talking with people about religion, and that is seeing the argument behind the argument, seeing the question underneath the question that they're asking. Many times somebody will ask a question or make an argument, but there's another question behind it or underneath it that is actually what they're asking. And I want you to be skilled in seeing the argument behind the argument or seeing the question behind the question. Know that ahead of time. If somebody brings this up, don't just launch into Pastor Tanner's argument against the problem of evil. But I am going to answer it logically this evening, okay? Now, here is the way the argument goes. It asserts three premises. All three have to be true. And it is said that if all three are true, then God can't exist. So the first premise is that God is completely good. And Christians, we as Christians, affirm this. This is something that we believe about who God is in our lives, okay? The second assertion is that God is completely powerful. Again, this is something we affirm. He is completely good and he's completely powerful, omnipotent. And then the third premise is that evil exists. Now, here is why this is a problem. Here is how the argument goes. If God is completely good, he would want to stop all of the evil in the world. And if God is all-powerful, he could stop all the evil in the world. You're putting that's premise one and premise two with kind of that subset under it, okay? If God is completely good, he would want to stop all of the evil. If God is all-powerful, he could stop all of the evil. You put both of those ideas together, and then the question then arises. Does evil exist? If evil exists, then it is concluded either God is not all good, God is not all-powerful, which the Christian asserts he is, or, and this is what the atheist would say, God does not exist. So that is how the argument is laid out logically. It relies on the fact that Christians assert that God is all good and he is all powerful. It relies on the fact that we say evil does exist. And it relies on the fact that if he was completely good, he would want to stop all evil. And if he is all powerful, he could stop all evil. Now, I have two brief arguments against it. Okay. This is a logical syllogism, guys. And if you guys know how syllogisms work, if you can defeat any of the premises, then you defeat the syllogism. And I have two ways that I want to try to defeat the premises in this argument. The first argument is I am going to assert that the atheist cannot prove premise 3. What do you mean? What I am saying is that evil exists is required for the syllogism to make sense. The atheist must prove or demonstrate that evil actually does exist in order for this to be a logical defeater of an all-loving, all-good, all-powerful God. Here's the question I want to throw out there. Can an atheistic worldview account for evil? From an atheistic perspective, can we say that evil exists, right? That's the first question. And I want to make the point that I don't think an atheist can demonstrate the existence of evil given his worldview, okay? Now, this is a moral argument from Timothy Keller, but I want you to know the argument from objective moral absolutes is a very common argument when it comes to morality and the existence of God, okay? So here's our moral argument for God's existence. This is from Timothy Keller. Fyodor Dostoevsky, who famously wrote, "Without God and the future life, everything is permitted, one can do anything." This quote usually makes secular people bristle with some warrant, because many use it to imply that people without faith are necessarily less good and moral than those who believe. So here's what we're not saying. We're not saying that if you don't believe in God, you're immoral. That's not what we're saying. What we're instead asserting is how can you account for that morality? You see the difference? How can you give an account for the fact that you are moral? All right? That's the question. Dostoevsky does not say that without God there can be no more moral feelings or moral behavior. He says that without God there can be no moral obligation, that everything is permitted or allowed. What does this mean? Anyone can say, I feel this is right to do, and so this is how I will act. All of us live our lives that way. The moral source in this case is a feeling within, right? I feel that this is the right thing to do, so I'm going to do it. Or I feel that this is a wrong thing to do, so I won't do it. So anyone can say that, but the moral opinion is based in you, right? You're the one who's discerning whether or not this is good, bad, or indifferent. However, on the secular view of reality, how can anyone ever say to anyone else, this is right or wrong for you to do, whether you feel it or not? You see the logical step we're making? It's one thing to say, I think this is wrong. It's quite another thing to say, I think this is wrong for you to do. Okay? How can you do that within a secular worldview? You can never say that to someone unless there is a moral source outside of them that they must honor. Unless there's a moral ought in the universe to whom we are obligated, you can never tell somebody, you shouldn't do that or you shouldn't live that way. If there is an omniscient, omnipotent, infinitely good God, he himself or his law could be that moral source. If there is no God, however, it creates a giant problem in that there doesn't appear to be an alternative moral source that exists outside of our inner feelings and intuitions. Therefore, while there can be moral feelings and convictions without God, it doesn't appear that there can be moral obligation, objective moral facts that exist whether you feel them or not. In an atheist universe, morality can be rejected without a clear, compelling reason to believe in its reality, and that's exactly what will sometimes happen. This would not be a difficulty if secular people were to grant that there's no moral obligation, that all moral intuitions are subjective, and that there is nothing that is objectively wrong and evil to do whatever you feel like it is or not. However, there is virtually no one who truly believes that, who thinks that there are no moral facts. Morality is therefore a significant rational difficulty for the secular viewpoint. And it's right here that I want to go. There is nothing that is objectively wrong and evil. So here's my point, guys. If morality can only truly be imposed upon us from an objective, absolute moral source like God, and atheism rejects that objective, absolute moral source, then we have to ask this question of the atheist. The atheist says God is completely good, God is completely powerful, evil exists, therefore God does not exist. We must take issue with the atheistic attempt to assert premise 3. We must say, atheist, you don't get premise 3. That's not something that's available to you. You can't prove that evil exists. Why? For evil to exist, there must be a God. And as an atheist, you don't believe in that God, so you can't truly demonstrate that objective, absolute moral standards are true or exist, and therefore you can't prove or assert the existence of evil. That is the first way this syllogism begins to fall apart. They can't assert or prove the existence of evil, and when they can't do that, then that is a defeater to their argument. So here's the real point I want to drive at. Is the problem of evil a problem for the Christian, or is it actually a problem for the atheist? I think we should take the problem of evil and flip it on its head and say this is a problem for the atheist, not for the Christian. Why? Because the atheist asserts that evil exists. The atheist says, look at all this evil in the world. A good God can't exist. And you say, what evil? Don't get me wrong. I believe there's evil in the world, but how do you account for evil? How can it even be evil or good out there in the world if you don't even believe in objective, absolute moral standards? If those things don't exist, then evil doesn't exist. And if evil doesn't exist, your argument against God actually is an argument against atheism. Do you guys see that? It flips back on the atheist because when they assert evil exists, evil exists, evil exists, we say, I know, but how can it exist if atheism is true? And they just stand there because they don't have an answer. So the problem of evil is not actually, at the root of it, a problem for the Christian, but is instead a problem for the unbeliever, okay? And I think we need to show that to them, demonstrate to them, hey, you're bringing up the problem of evil. It's a good question. I just want to know, what do you define as evil? And you need to keep drilling down and show them that ultimately they are defining it subjectively based upon their own feelings and emotions. Well, I think this is evil because, it's obviously evil. No, that's not an answer. Something is evil objectively if there is an objective, absolute moral authority outside of ourselves that demonstrates it to be. And atheists lose God and so can't prove that. That is the first argument that I would use. Question their ability to assert the third premise. Here is my second argument, and it has to do with the hidden premise. Now, the first argument demonstrates that the atheist essentially has to become a Christian in order to level this charge against God, right? They have to become a Christian because they can't prove that evil exists, okay? So that's the first way. But the second argument that I want to put forward has to do with a hidden premise that is built into the syllogism, okay? God is completely good. God is completely powerful. Evil exists. This is the premise I'm taking issue with. If God is completely good, he would want to stop all the evil. I'm not taking issue at all with the premise, if God is all-powerful, he could stop all of the evil. I'm not taking any issue with that at all. But as a Christian, I take issue with the statement that if God is completely good, he would want to stop all of the evil. How do we know that, guys? How do we know that if God was completely good, he would want to stop all of the evil? How do we know that that would be his ultimate goal or ultimate standard? Guys, it's in this situation that we have a terrible case of hubris as human beings, to think that we know better than God, to think, well, if I was God, I would stop all of the evil, right? We so often fall into this problem as Christians, and I don't know why we think we're smarter or better than God. And we think, wow, God should stop all the evil. He would want to do it after all. You don't know that. You don't know that he would want to stop all of the evil. What if God wanted to stop all of the evil in his own timing and didn't want to do it right now? What if he wanted to wait? What if he wanted his son to die for the evil so that he could redeem a people to himself? Simply asserting that if God is completely good, he would want to stop all of the evil just demonstrates our pride as human beings, that we think we know better than God. And so it's at this point that as a Christian, I think we should insert a fourth premise into the argument. God has morally sufficient reasons for evil to exist. And you know what we're building right into here? You know what this is, guys? This is faith, okay? This is faith, taking God at his word, believing who he is. Once this premise is inserted into the argument, this whole syllogism no longer defeats Christianity, okay? God is completely good. God is completely powerful. Evil exists, but God has morally sufficient reasons for evil to exist. Done. Now you don't have to even prove that premise 3 is false. It's false from an atheistic worldview, but within the Christian worldview, it could be true. And if we insert the fourth premise, we've defeated the problem of evil, the argument against God because evil exists, by just saying God has morally sufficient reasons for evil to exist. And what is that? That's essentially faith. Exactly right, Fuzz. Fuzz says if God is completely good, he would want to stop all evil. If that were actually true, that's what he would do. But clearly, he didn't do that, so it must not be the plan. Exactly right, Fuzz. This is not a blind faith, just saying God has morally sufficient reasons for evil to exist. I'm glad you brought that up, Fuzz, because a lot of people might read that and think, oh, you're just giving God an escape hatch, a get-out-of-jail-free card. You're just saying, well, he has morally sufficient reasons, so you don't have to answer the question. No. When we read of the God who exists in the Bible, when we go through the scriptures and understand and discern his character, his motives, his personality, etc., we are forced to conclude, no, he's good. It can't be at all that he doesn't exist. He has morally sufficient reasons for the evil that exists. It's not a blind faith that we're just going to attach this to God to get him a get out of jail free card. That's not what it looks like, okay? And so that's very important to recognize. So guys, it's those two simple arguments. The first argument, demonstrate to me that evil exists. You can't within an atheistic worldview. So that's a strong argument that the problem of evil is not a problem for the Christian, but instead a problem for the atheist. That's a very important point. Demonstrating that evil exists is very difficult for an atheist to do. And so because of that, that's a strong argument that the problem of evil doesn't affect or defeat Christianity, but instead is damaging to the atheistic position. So that's the first point. The second point, God has morally sufficient reasons for evil to exist. You insert that article of faith into the syllogism, and you no longer have anything that resembles a logical defeater against Christianity. Again, you can go really deep into this topic. This is often referred to as a theodicy. I just wanted to create kind of a broad overview so you guys have a good understanding of a couple of strong arguments that I think help. Hey guys, part of Christian growth and discipleship comes from engaging with one another and iron sharpening iron. If you would like to more actively engage with this community, we would love to have you. If you hit up Twitch or Discord down in the description below, we can get much more involved in the conversation and we would love to have you there. Take care. God bless. Bye now.